Hello everyone. I've seen this game demoed at a couple of shows in the southwest over the last sort of year or so, and it's looked interesting, but I've never really engaged with it too much because when I've investigated on the internet, the rules were still in development and hadn't actually been published. And whilst it was possible to download some, a quick play version of the rules to get a feel for the game. I've always really wanted to hold out for the hard copy, for the final published edition, and just recently I spotted on YouTube that the author of these rules has got a YouTube channel now, which is called something like Brethren Tabletop Game or Brethren Tabletop Wargame. It's easy to find anyway. And he gives a sort of demo game on that and runs through the rules and how to set up armies and so on. And also has announced that it is possible to buy not only a rule book now, which is a more complex and extended version of the rules that you can get for free. So it is worth picking that up. But there are also two army list books, Armies of the Ancients and Armies of the Dark Ages. So it's the Dark Ages I'm particularly interested in because I already have lots of figures, lots of terrain for the period. So it's a game that I can just immediately pick up and run with. So I've got hold of the rules, as you can see. I've read them. I've had one trial game so far, and I wanted to give you an example game of my own and give you my impressions of the rules and so on. I'm going to keep most of my observations on the rules to the end of the video because it's going to be a very long video anyway, and I do tend to waffle, and I have got a lot to say about these rules. But right at the beginning I'll say two things. One is that the author of the rules, Matthew Sutton O'Connor, is actually local to me, I've discovered. And so I want to immediately say that I as far as I know, to the best of my knowledge, I've never met the guy. He was probably there at those shows demoing the game, but I didn't actually speak to anyone when I was looking at the game. So I purchased these rules myself. I'm not influenced or sponsored by him in any way. And I'm going to be, I'm completely impartial about the rules. Overall, I would say they are very good and very enjoyable set of rules. More on that at the end of the video. The other thing, just in passing, I would say as well, though, that I've often remarked on my YouTube channel about the the nature of wargaming in Plymouth itself. That I've lived here since 1988, and it's always amazed me how big the wargaming population is. I'm always meeting people, or not meeting people, but discovering people such as this author, but meeting people, in various shops or whatever, just encounters. Even my last eye test, the chap who, one of the staff was talking about wargaming and how he did it, and yet never seen him at the Wargames Club, never seen this guy at the Wargames Club. You know, lots of other people I know who just don't go to the local Wargames club, but they do go. They'll travel over to Exeter to play with friends or to play, you know, in at the Exeter Wargames clubs, and it just amazes me, absolutely amazes me. Anyway, that's enough of that aside. So I'm going to get straight into the game, and things that crop up in the game I will talk about during the game. But as I say, most of my observations I'm going to keep till the end of the video. I've been making notes, and I have got an awful lot to say about these rules. Okay, so the first thing you have to do, it's a skirmish game. You have to build up a band of warriors in order to play the game, or two bands of warriors to fight against one another, obviously. I'm going to start off, as I would advise anyone to do, with the smallest level of game, which is below 250 points. And for that, you are only allowed one hero in your band. So this is the Anglo-Saxon force that I'm going to be playing with. So it's composed of my hero. So you can have two types of hero. You can have a combat hero or a support hero. So this chap is a combat hero, and not in the free to download version, but certainly in the published rules. There are various specialities that you have to assign to the combat hero. So for the Saxons, I have made him a defense specialist. Now, that would be my first observation, really, which, you know, I'm going to come back to all these things right at the end. But if it's what you see is what you get, so, and it makes it much easier to play the game if that's the case. So this chap, you pay, I think it's 50 points for him, but then you also have to pay for his equipment. So you have to pay for his shield, and you have to pay for the sword that he's carrying. Now, if he's a normal combat hero, he would have a defense factor, I think it's of 4. I'll just check that. Yeah, it's 4. If you make him a defense specialist, then that goes up to 5 automatically. If you give him a shield, it goes up to 6. And even with modifiers, the highest number you can roll on a dice is 6. If there's a +1 or a +2 modifier, doesn't matter. The highest number you can roll is 6. And that means that because you have to exceed the defense value in order to inflict a wound on a character, that this chap is impossible to kill. So if you're playing a scenario where the aim of the game is to kill him, the only way he's going to be removed from the table is by failing a morale test. So that's just an observation. As I say, I will come back to all these things at the end. I'm not trying to criticise this game too much because I have enjoyed it. I think they are very well conceived and well structured rules, but there are quite a lot of things in it that you know, you have to sort of work your way around. Okay, so there's the hero. As I say, what you see is what you get. So I've also got in this faction 3 housecarls who are equipped with double-handed axes. So that means that they cannot be equipped with shields. Both their hands are occupied wielding the Dane axe, so they can only have the one weapon. Going down the line the other way, we have 5 feared who are armed with spears and with a shield to defend them, and 2 feared who are armed with a bow. The whole of that comes to 244 points, which is just below the 250, which is the lowest level of game you can play. Okay, now I'm going to show you the Viking opponents. Okay, so here's the Viking group. So you have, again, a combat hero. He is also armed with a shield and a sword, or equipped with a shield and a sword. In his case, though, I have made him a melee specialist, which means he attacks with more attack dice. And also, I forgot to mention with the Saxons, but with the combat heroes, they do have a tactic, I suppose you could call it, which they can employ for 1 turn of the game. So the modifications to their defense or their attack rolls or whatever is permanent for that figure throughout the game. But that once in the game, in one turn, they can apply other tactics or rules to various figures around them. But we'll get onto that during the game. Okay, so all the other figures, there are 7 other figures in this band, and they are all termed raiders, so they are the equivalent of the house skulls in a way. I think each is 18 points before you begin to pay for their various weapons, but they are all equipped in a different manner. So you've got a guy there with a sword and a shield, another with an axe and a shield, another there with a double-handed axe, another here with a double-handed axe, a Dane axe. Now this is where I diverge slightly, or my figures aren't quite compatible with the rules, in that I'm ignoring the fact that he's been sculpted with a shield on his back. As I say, if you're carrying a Dane axe, you can't have a shield. So I'm not allowing him to have a shield, but that has kind of raised an issue during the game, in that as far as I can tell from the rules, the figures have a 360-degree arc, viewpoint, whatever, so they can see things behind them. But it does mean that they can also be shot at from behind. Well, they could be anyway. So in theory, what you see is what you get, means that he would have a shield on his back, so he would increase his defense capabilities just if he was being shot from the rear. But I don't think, as far as I understand the rules, that the rules are intended in that way. If you're carrying a shield and you paid for the shield, then it will protect you from missile fire from any direction. And because you have a 360-degree vision, it means if someone fires an arrow at you from the rear, if you're carrying a shield in the front, like the combat hero is, that defends him from a missile fire from the rear as well. Okay, and then we've got another 3 figures here. Shield and an axe, shield and sword, and a spear and a sword. And all the weapons have different attributes. They cost different amounts and so on. So again, we're going to have to come into the come into the intricacies of it as we play the game. Just to say as well, though, that in the Army Supplement book, the Vikings have as a whole, have a different factor, different attribute, which is that they are axe specialists. So that means that if they're using just a straightforward single-handed axe, I believe they get an additional attack dice. I think that's right. No, just using an axe for any side gets an additional attack dice. But the Vikings get to re-roll 1 failed rolled because they are axe specialists. But that brings me on to another thing as well, though, before I get into the game, is that it's points based. How it's really hard for any rule writer to enumerate points really for a different character. So, for instance, that Saxon housecarl that I showed you earlier is 18 points. This Viking raider is 18 points as well, but one of them, I think it's the Viking, look up, they have exactly the same factors, you know, movement, attack and so on, apart from their defence. So the Saxon housecarl has a defence of 4 and the Viking raider has a defence of 3, and yet they both, other than that, they are the same and they both cost 18 points. So is that a mistake, or is it just an inevitability of the way, you know, the points are kind of costed? How much of a calculation has gone into that, I don't know, but it seems to me that, I mean, the raiders and the housecarls are the core of the Viking and Saxon sides, and yet one of them, they both cost the same, and yet one of them is weaker in defence. Okay, now I'm going to show you the table setup. Okay, this is the table setup. So you need a lot of scenery, you need it to be crowded. It is very much a skirmish game, so you don't want too many, you don't just want a blank canvas, you want cover, you want things that slow down movement, that kind of thing. So I'm imagining this as a kind of small Saxon settlement that's been in the middle of a kind of area that's been cleared from forest. So you've got a wood in the background here. So I've got them on a sort of base there. So the wood is anything within the base counts as being in wood, so you can move the trees around. Basically, the trees themselves aren't static. Everything else is static though. So I've got areas of sort of fern, bracken, including this area here. There isn't really a category for that type of terrain in the rules, so I'm calling it short obstacle, which means that there's a 2-inch reduction in movement. Normally that would be as you go over, say, a fence like this fence here, but I'm saying that moving around in it slows infantry down by 2 inches, whereas interestingly in woodland infantry can move or run normally. It's the mounted troops, which I don't have any of, that are slowed down or impaired by woodland. Then we got a number of houses or huts, dwellings. I'm going to play that none of these can be entered, so they're just there as static vertical obstacles to conceal and to give cover and so on. And there's an area there, a field area, which is just open, except that the fencing around it is an obstacle and it does provide a certain amount of cover. Okay, so the next thing to do then is to place the figures down on the table, and you roll for, highest dice starts by putting figures down first. You can either put them down as groups, so you divide your force up into thirds and you put those down, or you can put them down as individual figures. I'm going to put them down as individual figures, so I'll speed the camera up when I do that. But just to say, this is another thing that I spotted, or it's not spotted, it's sort of blatantly obvious in the rules, that at the beginning of the book, which I think the core rules, which I think must be the ones that are available for free, it does say that battlefields are typically 3 feet wide. For example, the smallest battlefield is 3 feet by 2 foot in size. Players will deploy along the 2 foot sides, so in other words, along the short sides. But all the missions at the back of the book, which I think are only available in the rule book, either have the deployment with one side in the centre and the other deploying all the way around the edges, or absolutely all the others you deploy along the length of the board. So in other words, along the 3 foot length. So I think that is something that has just been missed in the development of the rules, that originally with the core rules, which are the basis from which the whole thing has been expanded, I mean, in the original core rules, you were meant to deploy along the short edge. Okay, so I'm going to speed the camera up and just deploy the figures onto the table. Okay, first phase of turn one then is the priority phase. So you simply roll 2 dice, and the highest dice roll player gets to move a unit first of all. So I'm just doing that off camera because it's not terribly exciting. So the Vikings have rolled 2, the Saxons 1, so the Vikings are going to roll first of all. Now each figure has a certain number of action points. For most of the figures it's 2, and for the combat heroes it's 3. And you can obviously expend those units in a number of ways, so moving, running, aiming a bow, loosing an arrow, that kind of thing. Preparing, waiting, which is kind of like a deferring action. But if I activate the combat hero, he can spend 1 action point or 2 action points, I think it is. Have to look that up. Yeah, the orders from a combat hero cost 2 action points. So first thing the Viking's going to do then is that he can command or give orders to anything within 6 inches of him. So I've deployed all of the Viking force to be within 6 inches of the warlord. So he's going to give a group order to the whole lot to run, and they're going to run down this way to attack the Saxons at the other side of the table there. That is another element of the game, possibly to point out here, that you have this all-seeing, omniscient kind of ability from both players. So there's no way of, say, hiding in the woods, ambushing, other than there is a wait order, which I suppose kind of comes into it. So anyway, the movement is 6 inches, and with a run you add the result of a d6 dice roll. So I've rolled 6, so they can all run 12 inches in this direction. They have to end up within 6 inches still of the hero. So that's got the Vikings completely off to a good start, because that means that they've got their entire force. So now it's really just up to the Saxons to react, and they can move figures individually and so on. I think so. Normally, as I say, you would be moving figures alternately, but now I'm just moving the whole of the Anglo-Saxon force because there are no Vikings left to move. I think I've deployed quite badly here because I split the force up, and I really want my hero to be over this side of the table. So he is going to make a run for 1 point, and then I think he is allowed to then give a group order. If he can get within 6 inches of these figures here, he is then allowed to give a group order. That's the way I'm going to play it anyway. So he rolls a 4, which means he can run 10 inches, which gets him exactly where I wanted him to be, behind this group here. And then he's going to give a group order to those 5 feared there to form a shield formation. Now, only figures that are carrying shields can form a shield formation. As I say, it is very much what you see is what you get. And it does make it a lot easier, especially when you're learning the rules like I am. Okay, now the house skulls in the wood, I've no idea why I split. I suppose I split the force up because there's a dwelling in the way of proper deployment. The house skulls are going to all run in this direction here and try and attack the Vikings from the rear, from the side. Okay, so they all had to roll individually, not as a group, so obviously they're going to roll different amounts, so the chances are they're going to move different amounts. So they are now in that area there, not too far away from the Vikings, but haven't reached them yet. This is another aspect of the rules, that charge is a group order. So you can't actually charge with an individual figure. Again, as I say, I might be misinterpreting the rules, but charging gives you a bonus in terms of attack, but it can only be done by a group. So an individual figure can't run up to another figure as though he was charging him. He just has to move up into base contact. There isn't any additional factor, as far as I can see, for a kind of impetus or attack bonus for an individual figure. So all we've got to do now, the only thing we've got left to activate is those 2 bowmen there, who are going to take a shot, I think, to begin with, at this figure here. Oh, and by the way, the scenario I'm playing, I should have said that, is called All Out War. So it means they have the objective is to eliminate the opposing force so that they have 20% or less of their starting force, which means I've got to reduce the Vikings down to just 1 figure, or the Anglo-Saxons down to 2 figures. So let's show you how shooting works now. Okay, the feared have 2 action points each, so for 1 action point they can aim, and for another action point they can loose. So they are going to announce their target as being that chap there. The range of the bow is 18 inches, and you are not allowed to measure beforehand, but I'm not even going to bother to measure because that is easily less than half the table, so I know it's well within 18 inches. Okay, the bow weapon has an attack, basically one dice attack roll. So you roll 2 dice, so I'm using the sort of reddish colour for the Vikings, blue for the Saxons. So the Saxons have rolled a 2, because they aimed, that goes up to 3, but they haven't beaten the Viking roll of 4. So that is a miss. Now the second fear does exactly the same, aims and then loose, and in that case he's got a hit because the 4 goes up to a 5, so that beats the Viking's roll of 4. Now you have to see whether you've wounded the Viking, and the way you do that is you have to re-roll the dice that hit, because you might have more than one dice that hit. So a javelin, for instance, rolls 2 dice. So you re-roll any dice that hit, and you have to beat the Viking Raider's defense factor, which starts as 3, but he is also carrying a shield. He's paid for a shield, which gives him an additional defense factor of 4. So I have to get a 5 or a 6 to wound him. And I do, I get a 5. Now that takes off 1 health, which in the case of a Viking Raider is only 1. So this chap here is pierced by an arrow and drops dead. Now that is the end of the activation phase. Next up there would be a combat phase, but there is no base-to-base contact between enemies, so there is no combat. So you then go on to morale phase, and the side that inflicted, or the side that has lost the most casualties in that turn, has to take a morale check. So I just want to talk a little bit about the wording of the rules for taking morale checks. This is where I think the wording could have been a little bit more, could have been a little clearer. So I'll read it out to you. And as I say, I'm not making criticisms of these rules too much, because I kind of appreciate it is really hard to write down rules that are clear and precise and comprehensive, but also are written in a way that is readable and doesn't become too much like reading a legal textbook. But anyway, the way this reads is: the player that lost the least amount of units can pick any enemy unit within 6 inches of one of its heroes. Now, does that mean that you pick a unit, by the way, is a single figure? Does that mean, though, that you are picking any enemy unit within 6 inches of one of your heroes, because it just says its heroes, which would be no units at all, because I haven't got this guy in the thick of the fighting? Or the way I'm playing it, the way I've interpreted it, is that you pick any enemy unit within 6 inches of one of the enemy's heroes. So that would then allow me to single out that hero, and then pick any unit within 6 inches of that hero. Okay, so that makes sense. So I could pick, say, this figure here, and any unit within 6 inches of that has to take a morale check. So this is the danger of grouping them all together, I suppose, that Now all those figures in that group have to take a morale check. But two things occur to me is, what if the hero has been killed? You know, therefore there is no hero to measure 6 inches from. Surely it would be much better just to say pick any unit, not one that's within 6 inches of the hero. But that is the other thing as well, though, that basically the way the rules are written is it means you can pick, you have to pick all the figures within 6 inches of a figure that is within 6 inches of the hero. As I say, it would have been much easier if just said that the opposing player can pick any unit in the opposing player's force, you know, and then you're clearly picking, you know, that you're going to pick a figure that is around a group of other figures. I mean, it's possible that, as I say, as the game grows in size and you have more heroes on the table, you do have heroes that are support heroes that actively influence morale. You know, so that you can, if you have a standard, I think it raises the morale of your own side, and if you have a horn, it lowers the morale on the other. So it might be something to do with that. I don't know, but anyway, I don't think that, you know, I don't think it's worded very clearly, and I don't think it works, you know, as in the manner that the author intended. But again, I might be wrong. Anyway, so I'm going to roll a morale check for all of these figures, and because they're all fairly good quality troops, they all have a morale of 10. So I have to roll 2 dice and score greater than 10 for each of the figures. I'm just going to name the nominate each figure and then roll the dice for you, so you won't actually see the figures. So I'm going to start with the Viking Warlord. Got to beat 10. So sorry, I've got to be 10 or lower, 11 or 12, and he's off the table, runs away. No, so he's fine. Then I'm going to do Viking with a cloak and a Dane axe. 7, he's fine. I'm doing a Viking with a sword and shield, and he's fine. Next one with an axe and a shield, and he's fine. Next another one with a Dane axe, and he's fine. Next another one with an axe and a shield, and he's just made it, because equal or below needed to survive. And then the Viking with the sword and spear, and he's fine as well. So they have all passed their morale checks. So I can take the dead figure off the table now, so I no longer need that to remind me what's going on. And we're on to the next turn. So it's a priority phase again. So we'll see who has priority. And it's the Vikings again. Right, now this is where I find the rules again a little bit inconsistent in a way, because obviously this chap here, or the 3 house skulls in general, are posing a threat to the flank of the Vikings. So I need, as I got priority, first thing I'm going to do is try and address that. So I've got the Viking Warlord here, and it makes sense for him to give a group order to at least these 2 figures here, so that together they can attack the lead Huskal. So I've got a choice really. I could either give them a group run order or a group charge order. The group run order would mean that all three of them would end up in base-to-base contact for sure with that lead figure. And he wouldn't be able, if you're charged, there are various things that you can do if you haven't been activated already. Like you can prepare, sort of like brace yourself for the charge, as it were. But you can't do that if they run. You can only do that if you're being charged. So charging can only be done outside of 3 inches. If you fail to reach the target by charging, and which I'm not going to do in this case because they're all within 6 inches, so it's 6 plus dice roll of a d6 dice roll. If you know, so if it was outside of say 10 inches and I didn't reach it, then there is a penalty for that. But the advantage of charging is offset by the ability of the person receiving the charge to prepare, whereas the advantage of running is that he doesn't get that chance to prepare, but you don't get the charge bonus in the attack. So anyway, I'm going to basically what I'm trying to say is that it's the distance that influences whether you fail the charge or not. You're not rolling to see if the order is successful, which might have made a bit more sense. Anyway, here we go. So they are going to order. He is going to order a charge with those two figures at that leading housecarl. So he rolls. I might as well roll the dice, but he only rolled a 1, but that gives him 7 inches. But now you're allowed to measure, and it's obvious, just eyeballing it, that everything is going to be within 7 inches. So he moves up. He moves up, and this one has to tread onto the obstacle cover, but that only takes 2 inches off his movement, so he's easily got 5-inch movement there. So they are now all in base-to-base contact with that single guy there. Out of turn now, out of the sync of the turn, he is allowed to take various actions. So one of those would be to prepare. So I'm going to put a little token down here. This is another thing about the game is that you do need a lot of tokens. There isn't a commercially available set of tokens to get anywhere. I mean, I think the obvious thing for the rule writer to do is to contact Colin Farrant at Charlie Foxtrot Models, I think they're called, who is also local to Plymouth. In the past he has designed some tokens for me just for my own games, so I'm sure the two of those could team up and produce tokens for this game. But in the meantime, all the best you can do is to print out I think they might be available on the web, but certainly other than that you have to photocopy the book and cut some paper tokens out that way. For me personally, I would much prefer to have tokens anyway, but at the moment I don't have a printer, so I'm just making up my own version of tokens. So for prepare, I'm going to have little shields there to mark prepare. So that figure is now prepared to receive the charge. So now it's over to the Saxons to activate a unit. So the obvious thing to do, knocking trees over. The obvious thing to do is to activate this unit here, who is simply going to move up to be in base-to-base contact with that figure there. So when you work out the combats later in the combat phase, you have to kind of segment all the various base-to-base contacts and so on. So that'll make a bit more sense soon. So now we're back to the Vikings. So now these 4 figures here all have to move individually. They can't move as a group. So I'm going to order the one closest to the Anglo-Saxons to run. So he is going to run at one of those bowmen. So he rolls 3, that means he can run 9 inches. So will that get him? Yep, that will get him. You don't have to move the whole distance, so he stops when he gets into base-to-base contact with that archer. Now, this is what I'm saying, that sorry, you can't see it there, he's now in base-to-base contact with that archer, but because he ran, the figure can't react to a charge, but because that bowman hasn't been activated, he can now take steps. He can now be activated. So he, in the Saxon turn, is now going to aim, takes 1 action point, and then loose an arrow at that chap who is now in his face. So it's going to be exactly the same procedure as before. There's no modifier for short range as far as I can see or anything like that. So the Saxon gets +1 to his dice roll. So the Vikings rolled 5, the Saxons have only rolled 3, so he misses. Next up, this chap is going to run at that chap there, the other bowman. So he rolls a 1, so he only manages to run 7 inches. So he's not going to get anywhere near. And again, may as well. Now what I'm going to do in the Saxon turn is the hero is going to make a group order to the shield wall. Shield walls can move. Yeah, no, I think I'm just going to leave them there. So he's going to leave an order for the shield wall to maintain its formation. Doesn't make any sense to kind of break the formation up or move them. Okay, so now we're back to the Vikings then. Where are we? Down here. So I'm going to order this chap next to run at the other bowman. He rolls a 6, so good chance he might make it actually. Yep, even allowing for having to run around that other figure. He now gets into base-to-base contact with that other bowman. Yeah, no, this is another thing about charging. The reactions it's got in the book are just to either loose an arrow or to prepare. Why not allow the figure to run away if he hasn't been activated? Surely if you were, a simple Saxon peasant and a big hairy Viking who was bearing down on you with a Dane axe, your reaction would just be to run away. So I'm not sure whether once the figure has got you in base-to-base contact, again, it's not something I've seen anywhere in the rules, but it would be a sensible rule to say that once you have been contacted by another figure, then you are pinned. Maybe it does say that somewhere and I haven't spotted it. Just having another quick look. I mean, it just says when a unit has been declared as a charge target, not that this is a charge by the way, if they have any unused action points, they can react before being changed. They can be issued with either of the following actions: prepare or loose. Why not just allow them if they haven't been activated? Yeah, if they haven't been activated, then the sensible thing I would have thought would be to move away. But it doesn't say that. In the, higher up in the page, it says if a unit reaches the targeted enemy, they get an extra attack to use in the combat phase. It doesn't say anything about having pinned their enemy down so they can't move away. So I think that is, there's going to be lots of circumstances where things happen in a game and it's not covered by the rules, but I would have thought that would have come up fairly early on in the playtesting phase, and it doesn't seem to be covered in the rules. So how am I going to play the game? Well, I think I'm going to create my own rule that you are pinned if you're in base-to-base contact. Because otherwise, regardless of whether you've been charged or someone has run at you, I think there should certainly be a negative modifier if like you're being hit in the back or something, if you're going to turn around and run away. So that's the way I'm going to play it. Okay, so that bowman now cannot move away, we've just decided, so he is going to aim and loose an arrow and try and kill that threat to him. He gets +1 modifier for having aimed. Yep, so 3 goes up to 4, so it's easily beaten the Vikings 1. And this particular target, yeah, he does have a shield, so he would start on a defense of 3, which goes up to 4 for the shield. So the Saxon has to get 5 or 6 to kill the Viking, and he does. He gets a 5. I should have said to wound the Viking rather than to kill the Viking, but as the raider only has 1 health, he is killed. Okay, so we're back to the Vikings now, and this is the last. I was going to say this is the last figure to activate, but there is still one more figure on the Viking side. So again, he is going to run, try and get as close to that bowman as he can, and he rolls a 1, which means he runs 7 inches. Just load my tape measure for a moment. So he doesn't get very far. And he gets to about there. Okay, and then the last figure to activate is now the Saxon turn, is this figure here. Now, he physically can't, there isn't room for him to get, oh yes there is, he could go to there and attack the warlord, because that token is just a token. I think he's going to do that. He can't charge because he hasn't got an order to charge, so he's simply going to move up. The alternative was to put him in base-to-base contact with one of the others, because he has one of the weapons which can lend support in combat, but it only lends 1 attack dice, whereas he gets a lot more attack dice for actually being in base-to-base contact in his own right with another figure. Right, so now we're on to the combat phase, and all the combat is taking place in this area here. Right, now you have to partition off all the base-to-base contacts, as it were, so that you have individual fights going on. So it is perfectly possible for two figures to be fighting one opposing figure, but in this case, the obvious thing is that it has squared off into 1 versus 1. So you have this Viking fighting that housecarl, this Viking fighting that housecarl, and the Viking hero fighting that housecarl. But at the end of the game, I will go into this again, because in certain situations there would be a choice of how you can partition the opposing forces off, and the advantage might go to one player or the other depending on how you partition the various combats. So there might be a 50-50 choice of what you could legitimately do. So there really should be a rule that, say, it's the player who won priority for that turn that decides on the partition. But anyway, we'll come back to that in a little bit more detail later. Right, okay, so this is where I'm probably going to begin to forget rules and so on. So we'll start here with this fight between the Saxon with the Dane axe and the Viking who has got an axe and a shield. So you toss up all the dice that they're allowed. So normally a housecarl would have 2 attack dice. Because he is armed with the Dane axe, that gives him another 2 attack dice. This is a circumstance that hadn't occurred in our previous game, but has cropped up now, so I'm not sure what to do on this one. But the Viking starts with 2 attack dice. Because he is armed with an axe, he gets 1 additional attack dice, but because he charged, he should get an additional attack dice as well, I believe. Yeah, they get an extra attack dice. But he didn't charge that particular figure, did he? If you remember, he charged that figure there. So does he still... I'm going to I don't know. I'm going to allow him the extra attack dice. So both figures, but again, it's not something I've spotted in the rules. It's one of those things that are going to crop up on FAQs or whatever, and to put all these contingencies into a rule set makes the rules really hard to read, really cumbersome. So there's a very fine balance to be drawn. So anyway, as I calculate it, both sides are rolling 4 attack dice. Okay, so the Viking is armed with an axe, which means that the faction bonus of skilled axe fighters comes in. So Vikings equipped with axes can re-roll a single roll when rolling for hits in the combat phase. Okay, so again, I might be getting this completely wrong, but this is the way I've interpreted how you play combat. So both sides roll 4 dice each, and there are no modifiers to these dice rolls in this particular circumstance. So you look to see who has rolled the highest figure, which is the Viking has rolled a 6 there. So the Viking has won the melee. Now, you don't pair off dice or anything like that like you do in other games like Force on Force, for instance, something like that. The 6, as far as I can tell, negates everything else below it. So it negates the 5 as well. Yeah, not putting that very well. If the other player had rolled a 6, then all the other dice are not considered, and you re-roll the 2 6s again to see who has won. If in this case this dice roll here of 5, it negates that 5. Had it been a 4, no, sorry, had this one been a 4, then that 5 wouldn't have negated that 5. So the Viking would have scored 2 hits against the Saxons, not 1. But as it is, there is only one hit, one successful hit that the Viking has that the Viking has rolled. But remember, he does get a chance to re-roll 1 dice. So he's had 1 unsuccessful hit. So 1 dice has been unsuccessful that he can re-roll. And he still gets a 5. So he would have needed a 6. Okay, so he has 1 hit against the Housecarl. And the Housecarl has a defense of 4. It doesn't have any modifiers or bonuses or anything at all, and he doesn't have a shield, which would give him a bonus. So to kill him, he only has 1 health, so 1 wound will kill him. So the Viking needs to score 5 or 6 on the dice, and he only scores a 1. Right, so in that small area of the combat there, the Saxon lost the fight, but he wasn't killed. That means he has to withdraw 1 inch. Okay, so now we go on to this second conflict here, which is between a Housecarl with a Dane axe again and a Viking with a sword and a shield. So in this particular instance, the Housecarl prepared. And preparing will give him, I think, I'm just going to look it up again, but I think that gives him an additional attack dice. Using prepared gives that unit a +1 modifier to their attack rolls. Right? So he can re-roll. Oh no, he doesn't have re-roll. He just adds 1 to all of his attack dice. Right. So that's something I would have got wrong if I hadn't read it again. So basically, Housecarl generates 2 attack dice. The Dane axe gives him another 2. So he's got 4 attack dice and he's allowed to re-roll all 4. The Viking starts with 2 attack dice. He charged, so he gets an additional attack dice, and he hasn't got an axe, he's got a sword, so he's only rolling 3 attack dice and doesn't get any bonuses or rerolls or modifiers or anything. Okay, so let's roll those. Right, my camera cut out, so I'm not quite sure how much of the action I've incorporated into this video. So just going to recap what's just gone on in the last few dice rolls, just in case I missed it on camera. Basically, I've been resolving the conflict between this Viking and this housecarl, and in this particular instance, the Viking lost but wasn't killed, so he has to move back 1 inch. That's a very short summation of what was a very long process, but never mind. Okay. So the final fight to resolve is between this housecarl here and the warrior here, the Viking hero. So in that particular case, the housecarl has 2 attack dice. The Danax gives him another 2 attack dice. So he's going to be rolling 4 attack dice, whereas the Viking is a melee hero, so where are we? Combat hero. So he has 4 attack dice, but yeah, sorry, he's a melee specialist. They're both of them are combat heroes. So once per game he could gain a further 3 attacks. I don't think it's worth playing that speciality at the moment, because if he was going to play it, then he should also have boosted the attacks on the other 2 players around him. So it's too late to do that. So he's just going to roll 4 attack dice, and I don't think the melee specialist ability gives him anything else. Oh yeah, he gets 1 extra for having charged, so he gets 5 attack dice. Okay, so it's 5 Viking versus 4 Saxon dice. Because my camera cut out, I'm not sure whether you saw this process on the previous fight, so I'll just recap the way I'm interpreting the rules. So the Saxons have rolled 5 and the Vikings' highest dice roll is only 4. That means that the Saxons have definitely won. And the next dice down is a 4, which matches the 4s. So there's only 1 successful dice roll there, which is the Saxon 5. So the hero's defense capability is 4, but he has also got a shield that puts it up to 5, which means he can only be wounded on a 6, and luckily for the Viking hero, he's got more than 1 health, so this won't kill him, and it's only a 3 anyway. So the upshot of that is that he gets moved back 1 inch after all that, having lost the fight. Right then, so in that whole turn, the Vikings lost 1 figure in the activation phase that was shot down by the bowman, and in the combat phase no one was killed. So that means that it's the Vikings who have to take a morale check, and if you're playing this rule, that you base it with for a figure that's within 6 inches of the hero. It makes sense again to select this hero here, because everything else on the table, apart from that Viking there, is within 6 inches of him. So just roll those dice in the dice tray. Right, so we'll start. Everything again is 10 or below is successful. So we'll start with the Viking hero, and he's all right. I did get nervous at this point though, because it seems to me that it's an easy way for the hero just to be taken off the board. But anyway, okay, so next up I'm going to do the chap next to him, who is armed with a sword and a shield. And he just makes it, got a 10, so that's all right. And then the Viking with the shield and an axe, 9, that's okay. Next up we'll do the Viking with the spear and sword, and he's all right. And then next up, the only other Viking within 6 inches who is armed with a Dane axe, and he's all right as well. So once again, the Vikings have got successfully through the morale check, and we're on to the next turn and the priority phase again, and the Vikings have priority. Sorry, messed up slightly. Forgot to resolve the combat between the bowman and the Viking with the Dane axe there. So, well, as no figures were lost during morale, doesn't matter anyway. But if the Viking manages to kill this Saxon feared, then it would have been equal number of losses on both sides. So no morale check would have been taken. So as it turns out, this is an inconsequential mistake. But before we go on to the next turn where the Vikings have the priority, we'll just resolve this conflict here. Okay, the poor old bowman is just armed with the default weapon, which is free, which is the knife. So he gets 1 attack dice, and the Viking has 2 attack dice for being a raider and another 2 for wielding a Dane axe. And you see how, yeah, look, the Saxon with the knife has rolled a 6. He almost won that melee. So I'm a little bit dubious about, the importance of the lucky dice in this sort of rules maybe. But anyway, you take off all the other ones below and just re-roll those 2. And yeah, the knife wins it over a big hairy Viking with a Dane axe. So the defense of the raider is 3, and he doesn't have a shield because he's got double-handed weapon. So the Saxon only got to get 4, 5 or 6. There's 50% chance of killing him. No, yeah, I'm glad that was unsuccessful, because I think that is a little bit I don't know, what's the word? Unbalanced. Right, now we're on to the next turn, and the Vikings have priority. Okay, so I'm going to start with a group order from the Viking, from the Viking hero. So, just to clarify something that I didn't completely cover previously, was that when you charge, you nominate a target figure, and then any unit within 6 inches of the warlord can charge, but they are able to charge any figure within 6 inches of the target figure. So in this situation now, I cannot order a charge because I'm within 3 inches. So a charge within 3 inches fails. Again, not entirely sure why that should be, but had I been outside of 3 inches, then I could have nominated that as the target unit, charged with him, but also charged with him against him and him against him. So that would then allow you to get a charge attack bonus against a number of figures, which is similar but not the same as what happened on the previous one. But anyway, I can't order a charge now. I'm going to take that prepare token off for the time being. So I'm going to order a group run. So anything within 6 inches can run, but they have to end up within 6 inches of the leader, of the hero at the end. So if I ordered him to run and he ran that way, he wouldn't be eligible. So I'm just going to order these 3 Vikings down here. So the hero is going to come into base-to-base contact with that housecarl there. This one is going to come into base-to-base contact with that housecarl there, and this one with that housecarl there. Now, as you remember, from my previous decision, I'm now saying that all those 3 figures are pinned and cannot run away. But equally, they don't have an opportunity to prepare because they haven't been charged. Actually, I might be a bit over. I might be over interpreting that because they do have an opportunity to prepare. Because any figure can prepare. So when the turn comes, I am going to, although they're not allowed to move away, I'm going to allow them to prepare. But anyway, before I do any of that, it's now the Saxon turn, and before we get much further, I am going to aim and loose at that chap there, who is the one that just lost that fight against this chap armed with a knife, so he had to move back an inch. So that bowman there is going to aim and loose. So because he aimed, gets +1 bonus modifier, which again just tips it because they both scored 1, so the Saxon roll goes up to 2. So there's 1 successful hit. So again, that raider only has a defense of 3 because it doesn't have a shield, it doesn't go up to 4. So 4, 5 or 6 will be sufficient to kill him. No, he survives. So in that case, it's back to the Viking turn now, phase of the turn. So he is going to just move into contact with that bowman. Next up then, there's a choice there. I've still got 2 Viking figures to activate. I think that the shield wall remains a shield wall until those figures are activated. And also the Anglo-Saxons, which I didn't notice and didn't mention previously, if the shield wall remains still, which they did earlier, they can become I think they call it a shield castle, which gives them even more defence. So I should have stated that that was a shield castle before. And as I say, as I interpret the rules, it is still a shield castle until the next activation. So it makes more sense at the moment for these two figures here to concentrate on the bowman. So he is going to move up to there, and then the bowman is going to aim and loose at him. So that's not a hit, because the Saxon were modified up to 5 for having aim, so it's 5 all. So that failed. So next, the other Viking figure is going to move up into base-to-base contact with that bowman as well. Okay, so he moves up to there and is now in base-to-base contact. So there are no more Vikings to activate. So it's just those figures. There's no point in them just standing there watching their bowmen being slaughtered. So I think we're going to have to break the shield wall, and they are allowed to move 3 inches, mind you. Yeah, I don't think that's legitimate to sort of move the shield wall as a whole. So they're going to have a group move anyway from the hero. So they're basically going to, they can move up to 6 inches, so they've all got sufficient movement to be able to move around and engage with various of the Vikings. So there's 3 Viking figures there, and they've all got at least 2. One of them's got 3 feared ganging up on him, and the warlord should really, can't get into contact with anyone, so he's just going to move a little bit closer that way. Right, and that is the end of all the activations, so now it's on to the combat phase. If we start over here then, so the most sensible division here looks to me as though this Viking has 3 opponents, this Viking has 2, and this Viking has 2. So if we start over here, the Viking with the Danax will have a total of 4 attack dice, and each of the 3 feared only have 1 attack dice each. A spear is still only 1 attack dice, so it's equivalent of a knife in terms of the number of attack dice it rolls. The thing about spears is that you can use them as support, so basically they can contribute to a fight without risking the figure themselves. So they can sort of reach over, they've got length, a bit like the Danax has as well, but equally you can put them in base-to-base contact with the opposing figure. So I make it that it's 4 Viking dice against 3 Saxon ones, and having a quick look, I can't think of any other modifiers or bonuses or anything like that because it wasn't a charge, so it's just 4 dice against 3. Right, so the Saxons have definitely won. They've got 2 6s They've also got a 4, but the Vikings have got a 4. So there were just 2 successful hits there. So the single Viking Raider has a defense of 3. So no shield. So 4, 5 or 6 will kill him because he only has 1 health. Yeah, and there's a 5 there, so he dies. Okay, so now we're on to the second Viking, who also has a Dane axe against 2. So that will be 4 dice against 2 with no modifiers or bonuses or anything like that. And again, the weaker side has 1. So they've got 6 there, but the Vikings got a 5, so that negates that. So there's just 1 successful hit. It's the same again, 4, 5 or 6 will kill. 6, so another Viking dies. Yeah, Vikings aren't living up to their reputation as ferocious fighters. Okay, and then the final part of that combat, it's a Viking armed with a spear and a sword against 2 feared, both armed with spears. So the superior quality of the Viking means he's rolling 2 dice, and each of the feared is rolling 1 dice each, so it's 2 dice against 2. And on this occasion, both sides have scored 6s, so we have to re-roll those 2 dice. And the Saxons win again. And again, it's 4, 5 or 6 to kill. 6. So there's another one dead. Yeah, so to me that does seem a little extreme. 3 kind of quality troops. I suppose they were swamped by numbers, I don't know, but yeah, anyway, let's carry on. So next up then we have this situation down here, and I neglected to prepare those 3 housecarls, which I said I was going to do, so I put tokens against all of them to show that they are prepared. So we'll start with the Viking hero against the housecarl. So the Viking hero is a melee specialist, so he has 4 attacks. He didn't charge. Don't think he's got anything else going in his favour, but the housecarl has 2 attacks in his own right, 2 for having the Dane axe, and he prepared, just momentarily forgotten what that, +1 modifier to their attack rolls. So, but 4 dice each, but the Saxon adds 1 to all of his dice rolls. Okay, so 6 can't be modified up, but the 2 goes to a 3. I can find it. The 1 goes to a 2. And the 4 goes to a 5. So 1 successful hit. The Saxon 1 hit. 1 successful hit because the 5 is matched by that 5. Now, in the case of the hero, he starts off with a defense of 4, but he's got a shield which gives him a defense of 5. So only a 6 will wound him. And he has got 3 health, I think, so he won't die. He doesn't even get wounded. So he does have to move back an inch because he lost the fight. Next up then we'll do this fight here. So the housecarl will have 4 dice and can re-roll. Oh no, +1, beg your pardon, +1. And he only has 2 attack dice, I believe. Viking Road has 2 attack dice, yeah, so he's only got a sword. So it's 4 +1, 4 dice +1 versus 2. So 5 goes to 6, 3 goes to 4, 3 goes to 4, 2 goes to 3. So the 4 there, they all match, so it's just a question of re-rolling those 2 6s. And this time the Viking wins. Hooray. Right, so the housecarl has a defence of 4. So 5 or 6 will kill him. No, it's only a 3, so he gets pushed back an inch. And finally here, so again, 4 dice for the housecarl, but in this case the Viking's armed with an axe, so he starts with 2, but the axe gives him 3. And the Vikings have a faction ability which will allow him to re-roll 1 dice, whereas the housecarl has once again got a +1 modifier for being prepared. Right, 3 goes to 4, 3 goes to 4, 5 goes to 6, which is going to win him the combat, and 3 goes to 4. So we've only got the 1 there, so let me take these out so that I don't knock anything, because the Vikings are allowed to re-roll 1 dice. So let's hope that he rolls a 6. No, he only rolls a 3. So that means that the Saxons win with the 6, but the 5 negates all the others. So it's just 1 successful hit from the Saxon, leading to beat a defence of 4, because he starts with 3 but he's got a shield. Puts him up to 4, so 5 or 6 will kill. Yeah, disastrous round for the Vikings. So he dies, which means that there are 2 Vikings left alive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, there's been 6 Vikings killed now. So 1 more and the Vikings have lost the game, and the Saxons haven't lost a single figure. So maybe that's just the way the dice roll, maybe it was the tactics, I don't know. But that does seem to me to be a little bit excessive. And now it's the morale phase, and the only 2 figures left on the table are these 2 here, which are within 6 inches of another. So the opponent's going to choose that hero. So they've both got to pass the morale test. And if either one of them fails the morale test and leaves the table, that means the Vikings have lost. Okay, so we start with the hero. He's alright. And then the other chap. And he's dead. Well, he's not dead, he's left the table. So that is the end of the game. So he comes off, runs away, and might as well remove the other 4 dead figures now. So I have to say that the game I played yesterday was more evenly balanced and went on for longer. So I don't know how much of a fluke that was, but the Saxons definitely ran rampant in that particular game, in that scenario. So nevertheless, it was still good, and the game, this is like the basic small game, just using the rules from the faction books and so on. So I think a good set of rules, worth investigating, and I'm going to stop at that point and now just have a discussion about the rules, which is going to take me quite a while to get through all the points, but nevertheless just wanted to talk to you about this for a bit longer. Okay, so overall I think a good set of rules, fun to play. Clearly it's been a long time in development, so it's not rushed, it's not hurried. All the elements dovetail together well and seem to be well considered. So really a lot of slight criticism I have about it might be as a result of my misunderstanding of the text. I'm not an unintelligent person, so if I can misinterpret, then others might as well. So I just appreciate it is very, very hard to write a workable set of rules that deal with very complex situations, such as a skirmish with multiple weapon types, multiple terrain and obstacle situations, different capabilities of the figures themselves, all that kind of thing. It's really difficult. You get a highly complex and complicated set of rules, without really trying, and then to be able to clearly explain those rules without it turning into a very dull read is really hard. And I think the author has successfully overcome those obstacles, but he has, I think, sacrificed a lot of explanation, and has really left it up to the players to decide between themselves what is the sensible way, to play a particular situation that he might not have got covered in the rules. I have mixed feelings about that. As I play principally now solo games, I haven't got a problem with it at all, because I just do what makes sense to me. But from experience of playing other people, I know that you can get very differing interpretations of a rule that is vague, and it can lead to a certain friction in the game between the two players. And yes, you have to have fun in your games, and you have to sort of play not play competitively. Well, if you're playing a tournament, then yeah, I would definitely say this isn't a set of rules for a tournament, because there are too many circumstances where a situation can be decided one way or the other, and in a conventional, just a club game or something like that, a knockabout on the table, I still know people who are the type of players who will want to win and will kind of assert their interpretation of a particular rule, and I don't tend to enjoy playing against those people. But just to say, oh well, toss the dice then to see who's right, you'll still get people who think that it's worth over asserting something because the 50-50 chance of having their way is worth doing, rather than listening to the opponent's rationale and saying, yeah, I see what you mean, you're probably right, and accepting their viewpoint. I still know people who will push it in order to get that 50-50 toss of a coin type decision that might go in their favour. So I'll give you an example. I really don't know where to start, because I do have so much to say about these rules, but let me give you an example from what I was saying earlier in the game. Got to find it now. Here we are. In the combat phase, they have a little example there, scenario where it says it's common for forces to charge into each other, facing off with their allies next to them. In situations like these, opposing fighters will pair off and duel each other. So what they've got here is a line of 4 against a line of 3. So let me just put some figures out on the table to show you that example. Right, so here is that situation then, where you've got 4 figures against 3 figures. Something I should have spoken about, I didn't mention at the beginning, you probably noticed, is that my figures are based singly for the game of Saga. So the hero figures I've got on larger bases. In this set of rules, all foot soldiers should be on this size of base. So I'm not going to rebase my figures, and I'm only going to ever play against myself, so I can work around that problem. But in theory, the heroes should have been on single bases as well. Now, in this situation here, they have divided the conflict off like that. So those 2 are fighting each other. You've got 2 against 1 there, and 1 against 1 there. But an equally reasonable division would have been to do something like that. So who decides that? It doesn't actually say. It is quite important, because you can have a scenario mission, for instance, where you nominate one figure in your force who is termed a VIP, and the player who kills that VIP first wins the game. So if that was the player's VIP, then clearly I would want that division. So I got 2 against him rather than 1. There's more chance of killing him. So if you're playing that scenario, you're going to argue, well, not necessarily argue cantankerously, but you are still going to have a discussion about how you divide up and what is fair. And the way I would say to do it was to give the player who has the priority that turn the option of deciding. But you can still see people argue against it. If this side here was the non-priority side, and the priority side said, I want you to fight like that, you could argue, well, here's the guy we want to kill in the game. We're obviously going to gang up on him, so you end up in conflicts like that. So it's sort of a trivial thing, but it's not, because if that's happening all the time throughout the game with lots of different situations and rule interpretations that aren't covered, then it's going to turn from being a fun game into a little bit of a frustrating one. So that would be my only remark on that maybe during the playtesting, situations like this that showed up should have been noted, and then somehow an all-encompassing rule. For instance, if in doubt, the player with priority gets to make the decision in all questions, of which way should the rules be interpreted. But having decided, then that rule applies for the rest of the game. So the opposite situation might occur later in the game, and the player can then say, well, we decided earlier that this was how we were going to play it. That's the point made, or that I wanted to make on that point. Let's move on to something else. Okay, now, on a more sort of general theme, the original rulebook, this rulebook here, only has illustrations of Dark Age figures. In the main, they tend to be Saxons and Vikings, I think maybe exclusive. Oh no, there are some Normans in here, and I think, and so on. But it's entirely set in the Dark Age periods, the original rulebook. So the two things arise from that is one is that I, like probably most of you, look at a mechanism, look at a set of rules and the basic mechanisms of the rules, and immediately think, oh yeah, I could use these set of rules, adapt them for, I don't know, in my case, something like my early samurai, so pre-musket era samurai, feudal periods, medieval, feudal. It would work perfectly well. The mechanisms would work perfectly well for them. The author has gone in the opposite direction chronologically. So he's got these two supplements out. One is Armies of the Dark Ages, which, by the way, is not totally comprehensive. I mean, he includes factions like the Mongols. Well, I would put the Mongols into a sort of late feudal period rather than the Dark Ages. He also includes Crusaders and Moors. Ditto. I mean, I know Saga, developed, and you can play 100 Years' War, and I think you can anyway, but you can certainly play Dark Ages. It began with Dark Ages, but you can certainly play Crusades and later periods. But it's not the Dark Ages. But in the meantime, missing are factions like, I've got a load of Franks, and the Franks should certainly be in here. But Mongols, I've got Mongols, but I don't think the Mongols belong in this period. But anyway, he's gone in the opposite direction. He's gone for the ancients. Now, mechanism-wise, my own feel for the Dark Ages and skirmish fighting in the Dark Ages is that it's much closer in similarity to some of those later periods, like the feudal period, than it is to the ancients. My feeling with the ancients is that the fighting, yeah, there must have been skirmishes, obviously, but you wouldn't have. It's a bit like I've said about later periods as well. You wouldn't have 10 legionaries turn up to a fight against 10 Celtic warriors, and for the legionaries to necessarily fight in a unit, you know, like what I'm trying to say is that the armies of the ancient period tended to be just that. They tended to be armies, and they tended to be organised into cohorts and so on, and they would fight in a disciplined manner and a coordinated manner, and that would be their strength. Whereas, to my mind, Dark Age fighting and skirmishing in general is more of a kind of one-on-one individual fights taking place over the area of the battle, rather than formations moving around and loosing off volleys of arrows in unison and that kind of thing. So I think the ancients period is is the wrong direction to go in, really. And this picture just sums it up entirely for me. You know, that you have this spread of highly trained, highly disciplined, uniformly armoured and equipped Roman soldiers, you know, fighting as though they're each fighting their own individual battle, and until the final end, you know, when the formations have been broken up, you know, and the discipline has been lost, and obviously that's what some fights degenerated into, but it's not how they were fought right the way through. So what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is this book really an attempt to recreate the fighting of the Dark Ages, or is it more a template for people to be able to fight any period pre-gunpowder, pre-black powder fight, you know, and use it for that? I would have thought, looking at the book and looking at the cover, that it was really more intended to fill a slot in the Dark Age skirmish field, rather than just to provide a template for skirmish fighting through the ages. That is what I would prefer it to have been, and I think that is what the intention of the rule writer would have been. And you know, if you take the example of Saga, I don't play Saga anymore because it is virtually impossible to play it as a solo game, but to me it began to kind of diminish, you know, almost from the start, really, when they started off by just adding more armies for the Dark Ages, but it soon spread into other periods and, you know, other theatres of war and so on, and it just seemed to dilute it and diminish it a little bit to me, you know. But how do you grow? How do you develop? You know, with a game that was so successful as Saga, then it's got to go somewhere. Whereas with Brethren, you know, I don't think this chap is. I know for a fact that he's not making rule writing his living or anything like that. He certainly has. You know, he's giving away it's free to download the basic rules. He's not selling figures. He's not selling scenery. You know, he's just an enthusiast, and he's written a decent set of rules for the Dark Ages. So he hasn't got to worry about, you know, where's it going to go next. He's done his job, and he's just got to sit back now and enjoy the acclaim. Whereas with Saga and Studio Tomahawk and Gripping Beast and everything, there's this sort of commercial machine, you know, sort of pushing it to go somewhere to continue to grow. So does Brethren fill a gap? Yeah, I think it does. I think it's fairly, you know, it fills a requirement, because Saga is a totally different type of game. There are other skirmish games I can think of. There's an Osprey game. I always get them muddled up because there's also a Warlord game. One's called Dux Britanniarum and the other's called Dux Bellorum, I think. The Osprey game I've never played, but I haven't heard. I mean, there are very good and very bad Osprey sets of rules, and I've never heard a lot of praise for the Osprey Dux, whatever it is. So I'm guessing that it's not particularly good. I've played the Warlord game once or twice, and that initially you start off thinking, oh yeah, this is going to be good, but it's not one of the Too Fat Lardies. Sorry, I said Warlord, it's Too Fat Lardies. It's not one of the Too Fat Lardies' best works, and they, you know, I'm not very keen on the great many of Too Fat Lardies' rules, but it's very hard to understand, interpret, and didn't really get into it. And they're the only Dark Age skirmish games I can think. Oh, there's another one called Blood Eagle, which is pretty good, but you do have to spend a lot of time building up your force. This to me is slightly easier faction builder kind of rules in it. The Blood Eagle, there's a lot more. Individual figures have individual characteristics and so on, and almost like a backstory. So I prefer this, but there is Blood Eagle, but it's never. You don't hear many people talking about it. I think it was, what do they call them, the Ministry of Gentlemanly Wargamers or something. They did Dice Show and in Her Majesty's Name, I think they might have done. I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah, so Brethren comes out pretty well, I think, in that league. You know, it's sort of up there. So I can recommend it from that point of view. But as I say, there's an awful lot I wanted to say about it, and most of the other things stem from the game I played yesterday. Some of them came up in the game today, so just looking at them, I'll go down them in the order I wrote them down. It's not necessarily the order of priority, but yeah, that business about charging, you know, I think you should have a rule that says, you know, once you're in base-to-base contact, then that the opposing player that you just contacted can't move their piece away, even if they haven't been activated that turn. You know, so that's the sort of thing. That blanket rule might help the player with priority decides for the game when the situation arises. That would solve that. Yeah, the other thing that I was saying is there's presumably 360-degree vision, but I say presumably because you could have a shield wall like that, for instance. Let's put a few figures with shields together in a wall. Okay, so there you have a shield wall. When a fight takes place, the figures that are in the shield wall, if they are hit, get an improved defence, but they get a negative defence if they're fighting from behind. So yeah, so if there's a figure behind them here, they get a negative defence. Perfectly reasonable rule, but it does it does kind of bring up this whole issue about 360-degree vision, because if you are being attacked from behind, then you would break the shield wall, you would break the formation and turn around to fight that way. Yeah, so looking at, so originally they would have had interlocked shields, so it would have been much stronger from the front. But a figure is going to turn around and fight that way. He's not going to completely ignore the attack from behind. So it's something. It might depend on the individual circumstance. If there's no one in front threatening the shield wall, and a figure comes from behind and attacks it from behind, then why shouldn't you be allowed to react to it? But equally, if I got another, let's find one of the missile figures. If I'm firing at something from behind, so if there's a figure here firing at a figure there, they're not in a shield wall now, so let's just say it's an individual figure. That figure gets its shield as an extra defence. So that implies that it has turned round, it has seen the figure behind it. It's got 360-degree vision, so it can turn round and use the shield as defence. So there's a little bit of, in a lot of the Western rules, the sort of Western gunfight rules, that crops up in that. Some rules specifically say, that you can be kind of attacked from behind and you suffer a penalty. You can be shot at from behind or attacked from behind. You suffer a penalty which you only see 180 degrees forward. And other rules specifically say you've got 360-degree vision. This set of rules doesn't say either. So I think it should have been maybe put in at the beginning, just to clarify right from the beginning, because there are some basics. There's a section at the beginning of the book. Sort of things to know. So included in that is, modifiers, how high and low do they go. So the lowest possible result is a 1, the highest possible result is a 6. So there are general things in that anyway, so maybe they should have put in that figures are deemed to have 360-degree view. Okay, yeah, there was a thing came up yesterday about firing into and out of a woodland. Let me move the camera over to the bit of woodland I've got on the table to show this one. Right, now this is another example of how it is very difficult to cover every contingency in a set of rules, and sometimes you try and write something down so that it's as simply described as possible, and you end up neglecting a circumstance that will often crop up. So the way the terrain rules for woodland, as far as ranged weapons are concerned, reads, it says, ranged weapons used for within this area suffer no penalty. So if you have a bowman inside the territory firing, it has no penalty. Okay, so that is pretty cut and dried. Ranged weapons from outside the area, so he's now outside the area, used against a unit within the area, there, suffers -1 to the hit roll. Okay, so again, quite straightforward. This chap is in sort of a forest. He's going to get a bit of cover, and the guy outside the forest firing at him is not going to hit him so easily. But it did say range weapons used from within this area, so he's now back within the area, suffer no penalty. So does that mean that he can fire at that chap there, even though he might be the full distance of 18 inches away? You know, he can fire without penalty. Surely, you know, firing from... going outside of the camera view now. You know, if the target is at one end there, 12 inches away from the person they're firing, surely that should be more handicapped than firing through just 1 inch of woodland like that. So maybe it should have said that ranges are reduced in woodland, or, you know, a target within woodland has a defence, you know, bonus regardless of whether the shot comes from within or without the woodland. It's something that's, you know, is bound to crop up in games. And again, it's one of those things where you could argue either way, and it could cause some friction in the game, you know. So maybe, you know, the player with priority decides for that game, but it's another one of those things that's going to get frustrating for someone if they're constantly being contradicted and the result constantly going in there against them. Anyway, on to the next thing. Okay. Next sort of very minor gripe. So there is a very elaborate point system. Different weapons have different points. Just trying to find a bit of paper here. Well, I won't go into it in too much detail, but yeah, when you're building the faction, you really have to do a little bit of paperwork to work out exactly how many points it's going to cost you. But here you have, you know, you're constantly going to, in people's minds, you're going to have to think, well, why is that such and such a price, and why is that such and such a price, and why are they different? So you have, figure here, a Viking raider with a Danax, and here you have a Saxon housecarl with a Danax. They both cost 18 points, so they should really be identical. So this may be a mistake in the printing, it may be a mistake in the rules, but it's certainly the case that the Viking Raider has a defence of 3 and the Saxon housecarl has a defence of 4. Now, you've just seen in the game that I played that the Vikings came out very badly in all the melees, whereas the housecarls survived, did a lot better. You know, a lot of that is going to be down to that 1 point difference in defence value, because this one, you're basically killing him. You've got 50% chance of killing him, or yeah, because it's on the wounding factor. So he can be killed after a successful hit. He can be killed with a 50% chance. He can only be killed with a 33% chance. So that's probably one of the things that made a big difference in that game. So it might well be a typo, I don't know. I think it's only, yeah, it's not, where are we? I think in the main set of rules, trying to find the points tables, and now I can't find it, but there must be. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I'm just going to stop the camera a second rather than you just listening to silence. Yeah, I think this is a situation where the original rule book is adrift a little bit from the army supplements, because the original rulebook doesn't have faction specific points, which the army rulebooks obviously do. So there's a force builder here in the original rulebook. I don't know how well you'll be able to read this, how well in focus it will be, but an experienced infantryman will cost you, here we go, experienced infantry warrior will cost you 16 points, and he is armoured and well trained, so he is the closest in this costing table that you will get to either the Viking Raider or the Saxon Housecarl, whereas now in the Armies of the Dark Ages supplement, you have at the back of the book, you have a table of points. So here under Anglo-Saxons you have the Housecarl warrior, who is 18 points. That's the basic points before you equip him with anything. So already that is 2 points adrift of the original rulebook. And down here under the Vikings, where are we? Vikings here, you have a Viking Raider, 18 points. So you would think immediately that there is an equivalence between the Saxon Housecarl and the Viking Raider, but when you actually go to the factions for each respectively, under Vikings you have here it is, sorry, long delays in this. So Viking Raider has a movement of 6, 2 attacks, defense of 3, morale of 10, health of 1. Saxon Housecarl here has movement 6, that's the same, 2 attacks, that's the same, defense of 4, that's different, morale of 10, health of 1. So there's no uniformity there, there's no consistency. It makes the Viking Raider, so either one of those two is a misprint, or there's a mistake or miscalculation, something, but there's something going on there anyway. Spending too long on minor quibbles really, as I say, it's just extending the length of this video. So what you see is what you get. It's a very sensible way of doing it. So here we have a hero equipped with a sword and a shield. only figures that have a shield are allowed to form a shield wall. So if you had a hero who didn't have a shield, could he order other units into a shield wall but not join it himself? It would be, I don't know. It just seems wrong. Don't quite know how you get around that, but I think the what you see is what you get philosophy is by far and away the best with skirmish games. It makes it far better, much easier to keep track of what's going on with one figure. So that's, again, minor quibbles. Yeah, okay, so the next thing, which didn't crop up in the game, is that if you have different weapons, so if you have a combat going on where you have one character such as this, where are we? This housecarl, and he is fighting a Viking with the same weapon, a Danax, but also another Viking who's only armed with an axe. Then these two Viking figures, you add the dice, you accumulate them together, but a different rule applies to this guy than this, because this chap, axes, not Danaxes, but axes, are allowed to re-roll one dice in the to hits. So you have to have two separate colours, because he may be rolling 4 dice, he may be rolling 3. You can't roll 7 dice and then just pick one of them to re-roll. You have to say that his 3 dice, one of those 3 can be re-rolled. So that's pretty obvious, but you have to be careful about that. So it might not warrant mentioning in the rules, but it's something that you need to be aware of. Yeah, so that was basically that point. The next point I wrote down was about the morale checks. And what do you do if there are no heroes? Because that wording definitely said that you pick a unit within 6 inches of the hero, or you pick, and then it's 6 inches from that to take the morale check. But what if there are no heroes left on the table? Does that mean you can't take morale checks? I think the rule might have been much simpler if you just said pick a unit from the opposing side, pick a figure from the opposing side. Not quite sure why charging within 3 inches fails, but yeah, it's a rule that's written down, so have to go with it. Right, yeah, now the next one was, and again it didn't crop up in this game, but it did in the last one, was that I've got a figure somewhere, this chap here. So this figure, what you see is what you get, remember. He has got a sword in one hand and a spear in the other. He's at a big disadvantage, because having 2 weapons doesn't necessarily increase his attack number of attack dice. The spear is a weapon that you can use to support, so that's its advantage. The sword is a plain weapon, doesn't give you any additional attack dice, so in a way it's no different than from a knife. as I understand it, and I've read the rules, let me get back to the equipment page here. Right. Now, I didn't spot this rule when I was playing either of the games, but here in the equipment, a sword in the hands of either a hero or experienced infantry is +1 to hit. So wasn't playing that rule. I'm wondering if that's because, again, there is a drift between the faction book. No, there's nothing in there about. There's nothing in the faction book about the properties of individual weapons that I can see. It's just their points cost. So sword costs 2. Yeah, so a sword is better to have than a knife. A knife is completely free. And a knife should be -1 to hit on the hit roll. So there you go. When that bowman with the knife killed the Saxon, maybe he shouldn't have done. So maybe I misplayed that. Another mistake. But anyway, my point here that I'm trying to make is that there is often no point in having a one-handed weapon in each hand. So if this guy had 2 swords, for instance, it wouldn't boost the number of attack rolls, attack dice that he had, and equally it wouldn't give him any more advantage than he already has. Well, I don't believe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe instead of +1 to hit, it's +2 to hit if you got 2 swords. Maybe it's a cumulative modifier. You see, this is what I mean. Again, you could be, you could begin to interpret things a different way. But in general, I would suggest, if you're going to interpret it that it doesn't give you any extra modifier, then you're much better off finding a figure that's got a sword and a shield. Straightforward sword and a shield, like this guy here. Because this guy has got a defence, this guy's got a lower defence. So you're beginning to sort of find the weaker type of equipment and weed it out. Build up a force that is a lot stronger for the same costings, same cost point. They're all little finicky things. I'm not going into a big rant against these rules. I think they're a very good set of rules. Yeah, I made the point earlier, and it didn't crop up during the game. But this chap here, as we played him in that scenario you've just watched, has a defence of 6 because he starts off with a defence of 4. That goes up to 5 because he is a defence specialist, and goes up to 6 because he's got a shield. So he is unwoundable because you can't modify a dice roll above 6, and you have to be above 6 in order to wound him. So the only way you can get him off the table is by him failing his morale check. So he's almost invincible. Physically he's invincible. It's just psychologically that he might fail his morale and run away. You know, is that an oversight in the rules, or is it deliberate? Difficult to say. And yeah, that, I think I will stop at that point. That is absolutely everything I have to say. I am quite excited about the prospect of using these rules for other periods, even though I do think they should be, you know, constrained to the Dark Ages in many respects. But I can see these, the mechanism of these rules being adaptable for my Genpei Wars samurai. So I might try and work out a scenario for that, show you a game of that. But anyway, I think definitely worth getting these rules, worth investigating. You know, come to a reinterpretation of them if you have strong feelings about, you know, the way arms were used and the way armies fought during the Dark Ages. But there's clearly been a lot of thought and a lot of hard work gone into making and writing these rules, and you know, I think they warrant attention. Yeah, okay, I'm going to stop. Thank you very much for watching. See you on the next video. Bye for now.